and gentlemen, welcome to lunch. First, let me turn on my mic. I think it's on now. Is it? Is it on? All right. As a theater person, actually, it's important for us to follow a script. So I have a script to follow in here. And it is actually very fitting to follow the previous speaker speaking about abuse. So I'm going to talk about abuse in a very different sense, and perhaps in a more international way of it, and perhaps in a way that we are fed the news. So perhaps our mind is being abused by not being told what is going on truly in the world. 25 years ago, I was teaching at Towson State University in Maryland, and I took the opportunity to combine practices of a Sufi poet, Rumi, most of you know him, 12th century Iranian Sufi poet, with the poetry of the 20th century Iranian poet, woman poet, Furugh Farrokhzad, and the experiences of 7 American young actors in a piece called 7 Stages. The piece found itself on the stage of Edinburgh Theatre Festival in 1991. There, I met a group of Latvian theatre practitioners who actually were trying to deal with their own glasnost during that time with a story called The Story of Billy Goat. We hit it really fine, and we became friends, and they invited me to go to Latvia to work with them. I decided, the next year of course, I decided to go to Iran to visit my aging mother for a few days before I made it to Latvia. I never made it to Latvia. The 10-day visit turned into a 7-year stay. Now, I'm sure that you are going to think that what person in a relatively right mind would leave an American faculty position to go to Iran and stay there, especially under these circumstances? Well, here's the story. On my first day, when I went to visit my mother, there were all her neighbors who wanted to come and visit and see the son who's been in America and probably, according to them, really successful and so forth. And after all these visits, I decided that, well, it would be nice to get in touch with my old friends, fellow students, or ex-professors, and other people that I knew. I began calling people. Many of them were no longer there. Some were either in jail or passed away. And few had been executed in the 1988 massacre. One of my ex-professors asked me if I would speak to his students. I welcomed the idea. I went to his class and I started talking to the students. In my talk, I began scolding the students about how lazy they are, and they are not really doing what we used to do. They are not working as hard as my generation, when we were in those seats there, and they are not practicing their art and so forth. I'm just going on and on, being an arrogant American educated person as I was. And one beautiful young lady stood up and said something that really changed my mind. She said, it was your generation that created this revolution. I had nothing to do with it. And when your generation realized that things are not turning out the way they wanted, they left, leaving me and my generation to deal with the aftermath of what they had created. She continued by saying that many good work of arts, many good books have been confiscated since the revolution. Many of our intellectuals and artists have left the country, or are in jail, or have been executed. And of course, those who did not sell out are now drowned in swamps of alcohol and opium. She said I was only 2 years old when all this happened. And I had no part in this. Now you have come here and you have the audacity to talk to us and tell us that we are lazy, we don't do anything. And of course, dropping her head down, she says, you will leave too. Even today, after so many years, when I remember that moment, there is a cold chill running down my spine. I could not stand on my feet. Like a lantern, I crumbled down. I sat down and started crying. My ex-professor started crying. She herself, the young lady, started crying. Everybody else was in tears. It was absolutely a very upsetting and depressing situation. Then I felt the hand of my professor on my shoulder. I looked up, even at a young age. He looked much older than he did at the beginning of that session. He helped me up. I stood up, and I looked in the face of the person who addressed me. She realized I needed her energy. She stood up and she looked directly at me. In the watery mirror of her face, I saw my forefathers. I saw the great speech of Cyrus the Great, right before his death. I saw the final resistance of the last Iranian soldier during the invasion of the Arabs in 600 AD. And I saw and I heard Farooq Farooq's line that thus it is, that one dies and another remains. I stood up, I cleaned up my face, wiped up my tears, and I promised her, I promised myself, I promised my ex-professor that I will not leave. The year after that was very interesting. I started hanging around a lot of young people, and they really took it upon themselves to educate me about what was going on in the country. One morning, having partied all the night before with these young people, they decided that we have to drive to Ashura, which is a annual religious celebration of the martyrdom of Prophet Muhammad's grandson. On the way, I asked one of my companions that, you guys don't look religious at all. What is this about going to Ashura? And he said, oh, don't you think that if you are all going to live in the same society, you got to understand each other? I was baffled. Then he continued, and he said, otherwise, one group, as we have it now, will lead, will become the rulers, and will ask everybody else, or demand everybody else to abide by their rules. And the female driver added her voice, there we go again, revolutions after revolutions. Well, in this ceremony, I saw not only the young people, but also the older ones. Many who have stayed in Iran have learned to tolerate each other. They have learned to listen to one another. I'll give you an example. At lunch, we were invited to dine with a couple who both participated in this ritual. When a female companion of mine talked to the woman about the logic of such violence and lessons that such violence may teach the younger generation, and the discussion became a little heated. The husband, who himself at the beginning of the revolution was one of the morality police, making sure that everybody else listens and abide by their rules, turned to her and said, "Isab din khud, misab din khud." Each to his own fate. Driving home with these people, listening to the blues, I kept thinking that something has changed and I had been left out. And I have not understood this because I have not been. Realizing my baffled face, my companion turned around and said, "Oh, didn't somebody say that revolution is not a dinner party? It doesn't happen overnight?" They left and made me think about the next lesson I'm going to learn. Then that spring, I was asked to teach a course at the University of Tehran. I welcomed the idea, I went to the class, and even though only a handful of students, advanced students, were registered for that class, the class was always overcrowded. The discussions in class always extended the university borders, and at times it even continued while we were walking to my house or a cafe to drink coffee. And then the university asked me to apply for a full-time position. I did. However, there were questions on the application that I did not feel comfortable responding to. So my official teaching stopped. But the teaching itself did not. The students came coming to my mother's house, apartment, which is directly across from the northern gates of Tehran University, and we had classes in my mother's living room. During those classes, I realized that my young friends have learned a very, very important lesson that we, my generation, did not know. They have realized, why is it that we are given 2 ears and 1 mouth? You see, when we were young, discussing politics and everything else, all discussion would end into argument, animosity, and at times even, to cutting off the relationships. We were following the main ideas of my way or the highway. But these young people have learned how to endure each other, how to listen to the opposing point of view, and at the same time, how to agree to disagree, leaving the conversation for some future dialogue. They have learned that if there is a future for any society, the future can only be established, be based on the mutual understanding and respect of differences, to agree to disagree, and yet work toward a common goal. So, having been stopped to teach, I decided to apply for permission to do theater. I sent proposal after proposal to theater authorities, and it all faced a wall of silence. So, realizing that I can't even direct in my own country, as I could in Europe and in America, I decided to go see plays. What was interesting that I saw that in general, productions created by the youth were more daring, engaging, and thought-provoking, with messages of reconciliation and bridging. Whereas plays staged by more seasoned directors, those of my generation, even though they enjoyed much larger funding and lots of support, they seemed to settle for the usual characteristics of theater as entertainment. We all have our limits. I reached my limit in 1996. After my 124th proposal faced a wall of silence. So I reserved a ticket to return back to America. But as fate has it, something happened that again changed my mind. I happened to share a taxi with a young woman. A young woman whose face, the little that was visible from under the heavy Islamic hijab, had a combination of fear, repulse, curiosity. We spoke. I inquired about her education. She said she studied lies. I thought, what does she mean? She explained. You see, I've studied history. History is nothing but lies. She was 2 years old when the revolution happened. I'm sorry, she was 6 years old when the revolution happened. Immediately, she was not allowed to play with the boys. She was not allowed to shave her long, wavy hair. And she wasn't even allowed to wear the green sneakers that she loved so much. So it was very much like many others that I had read. So every night, climbing up the northern hills of Tehran, I used to go hills climbing in Tehran at nights. Every night I kept thinking of that story and other stories similar to that. And every morning, as I reflected on my nightly strolls, I postponed my departure one more day. Then, 1997 happened. Iran elected a moderate president, Mahmood Karimi, and the future looks very promising. And of course, I was married too at the time. So, I thought, I'll try one more time. With the help of my students, I proposed the production of Midsummer Dream, Shakespeare's Midsummer Dream, which I translated into Persian poetry, and sent it in. The proposal was accepted. Permission for 45 performances were given, yet the production was raided and closed down on its 4th performance. I was summoned to the court of Islamic guidance and charged with the crime of raping the public's innocence. Go figure. Even though the court proceedings were inconclusive, but we kept receiving death threats against myself, my wife, and more importantly, my twin daughters who were only 18 months old at the time. So we left Iran in June 1999. I must tell you, my experience living in Iran has made me feel extremely hopeful for the future of that country. As we recently saw in the Iranian Dream movement, for the first time, we have a youth who go in millions, go into the streets peacefully, without any violence. And the moment that they realize that their peaceful march is going to turn violent, they pull back, thus preventing what many other countries in the region fell into, including Egypt and Syria. They pulled back, going back to the drawing board of education, thinking that they need to go back and re-educate their people, because democracy is not something that we can impose on people. Democracy is not something that we can import through bombs, and democracy is not something that we can say, my way of democracy or nothing else. I have nothing but respect and love for these Iranian youth, and nothing but hope and vision of a bright future for my lovely country of Iran. Thank you.
What is the impact of the media, television, broadcasting, radio, the internet, in the changes and the learning to accept each other and bring the disagree
I am very thankful to Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, because they have changed the face of media. The established media, as you know, and we all know, never tells the truth. They only tell the side that is the most popular. However, there is a much better tool. A little tool called Censor. And this has allowed people to exchange, to share with one another what they see. And as a result of that, we see a lot more not only in Iran, but all over. Look at what's happening in Missouri, in Baltimore. We have seen a lot more of an understanding of what goes on in the country. And once people understand, I think in anywhere, America, Iran, anywhere else, once people understand what is going on, then they have realized the pain, they have realized the sickness, and then they can attempt a remedy for it.
What recommendations would you make for changes in U.S. policy to Iran? What do you think Americans individually or collectively, your government should be doing?
I think the best thing that America can do, and now I speak as an American, I'm also an American citizen, so I think the best thing America can do is to stay away from everybody else's shoes. We have really grown tremendously with the new Secretary of State and the discussion about nuclear. However, we must understand that everybody in this world has the right to develop whatever they need within their own country. And we must also do a little research and realize that, for example, Iran in the past 200 years have never aggressed against any neighbor. Whereas we have other countries in the region who have nuclear warheads present, and they are not a part of IAEA, and they have created, at least in the past decade, they have created 2 or 3 wars and committed war crimes and what at least I would think is genocide. So our best bet is to follow the policy as it is, support the peaceful discussions, and leave other peoples of the world to their own.
One more.
Yes.
What do you think is more important? Nuclear independence and freedom, like you just said, in terms of each country for themselves, or protecting creative freedom rights?
They are not in opposition one another, I think.
See, don't you think they are in some places?
No, I'll tell you what, in some cases maybe, I'm only talking about Iran. In Iran, what we have, we understand that the oil is not going to last forever. Therefore, we need to look at other energies. And part of the energy that we're looking for equally is the solar energy as well as the nuclear energy. However, we don't have as much sun there as we do here. So
as an American, though, what's more important? Investing into
As an American, I think that they have invested enough in nuclears and in wars and in weapons and all that. It is about time to invest in creativity. Yes, as an American.